Thanks very much, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here and have a chat with you today. So I've just had a 3-year-old's birthday yesterday, so I'm still suffering the after effects of that. Heaven forbid when he gets to 21. The learning analytics, oversimplified and underused. Actually, they're the only 2 points I want to make today, but in the spirit of true academia, I'm going to actually talk about that for 30 minutes. So I'll go through a few things today. Let's just establish a common understanding around what we're talking about in learning analytics, because the term gets bandied about a lot. I'd like to also just touch on the element of prediction is quite easy, okay? It's the implementation and the interpretation process that becomes complex, and that's where we get a little scared off. I'll take you through some work we did around having a systems view, a bigger view of what learning analytics in terms of organisational adoption. And then an area I'm increasingly getting interested in is complexity leadership, and particularly in terms of implementation of things like learning analytics. So just a brief history. Back in early 1920s, a guy called Prezi established what we might call the first intelligent tutoring system. He built a machine that basically, when students entered A, B, C, D, or E, they were given a lolly if they were correct. It was a high point. It was the zenith of education at that particular point in time. I think we've gone down. But 1930s, we've had the Psychometric Society founded. 50s, cognitive sciences were formed. 80s, we started to see learning sciences come in. In 1990s, we've saw the very rapid growth of educational technologies and the adoption of learning management systems across universities. In 2005, the first workshop on educational data mining, and now there's the International Society for Educational Data Mining, was established. 2011, in minus 30 degrees, we held the first Learning Analytics Conference, which was a group of hardy people who braved the cold weather. And then following that, we established the Society for Learning Analytics in 2012. And the reason I do that is, just go back through that, is we do draw on a huge range of fields there. I didn't add in things like social network analysis, especially the growth of that in the 60s, even statistics as well as another area we go through, and not to mention learning theory and educational research as well could be all implemented in there. So learning analytics is very much a multidisciplinary field. The actual term of it, though, is very new, and it's bringing together these multidisciplinary fields in new ways, which makes it very exciting, and that's very recent. So a lot of the drivers for learning analytics in particular and intelligent tutoring systems, educational data mining has been partly around Bloom's 2 sigma problem, and I'm happy to talk about that later if you like, but it was this notion of one-on-one tutorial was more effective than other aspects. I can get it if other people would like, but no problems. It was this driving pursuit for personalised and adaptive learning where we get to. So, and we can see why when we start to see things like active learning. This is a meta-analysis by Freeman, which clearly showed that that failure rates reduced, academic performance increased when we have things like active learning versus what I'm doing right now, a traditional, more lecture-oriented response. And Dragan Gasovic will talk a lot about the importance of feedback loops, and obviously John Hattie's work as well around feedback. The personalised, instructional, timely elements of feedback are critical when we start to talk about active learning. That's where it comes in. That's where we can start to be a little bit more personalised in the type of feedback that we're providing versus a venue such as this. The other aspect of it too is when we go into scale, how do you actually do that? And that's where we're starting to see a lot more interest in data and analytics, is trying to bring those elements together to provide personalised and adaptive feedback mechanisms through scale using data and analytics. And we're getting a huge growth. Like, this is just scratching the surface of the number of companies that are investing in this area. I know we have Blackboard folks here today. Anyone in the audience? Don't be bashful. Be proud of your company. There we go. Just bought out Blue Canary most recently as well, and obviously Moodle Rooms and Moodle Analytics as well. Moodle Rooms being involved in there. But Blue Canary was a very, Mike Sharkey from University of Phoenix established this company. Excellent work in the predictive elements that are coming through. And we're also seeing work like Civitas as a growing company working as consultants, but basically bringing in and setting up a whole suite of data analytics for universities. So learning analytics is the collection, collation, analysis and reporting of data about learners, their contexts, for the purposes of understanding and optimizing learning. It's a beautiful definition. It's amazing what you can get to in minus 30 degrees and no one wants to go outside. But essentially the most important part there is the understanding and optimizing, and that's the elements we don't do well at present. And that's where I'll start to flag around it's oversimplified because we gather data, we can analyse the data, but we don't understand the data well, and we're certainly not feeding that back in a way that optimises student learning. So the most common thing is get answers to your important questions like how can I easily find students who are at risk? I'd like to talk more about success rather than identification of students at risk. A student who wants to get a high distinction because they need to get into a medical program, a credit is no longer a success. Okay? So pass, fail is very easy to pick up. Purdue University, in particular, their signals work was the first university to start to try and do this at scale, and they had a very simple metaphor. You know, red light, you're not doing too well here. Amber light, you could go well or you could go poor, we're not sure. And green light, you're cruising along. And so they had built a system there through John Campbell around establishing for students as they enter their course, if the instructor elected to use signals, I emphasise that bit, it wasn't immediately available for all courses. If the instructor elected to use it, then students would be able to see and the instructor would be able to see how they're tracking there. And it was essentially based on prior academic ability, what were your grades coming into the course, and then your effort in the course. So if you weren't doing too well coming into the course, we would expect you to make more effort. If you're doing really well, then perhaps the amount of effort you need compared to your peers can be a little less before we get worried. Very simple model, but it was very simple, and it ignored the complexity of analytics. We got things like this. This was the caution. You could do better in this class. And I didn't actually point to Mike then, I'll just note that. Importantly, so you need to work harder or get more help. And there was a nice study by Tanz et al. Who sort of started to look at the way that instructors saw the messaging here. Now, some instructors saw this as being motivating, that students will now be more motivated to go and get help and improve their studies. But essentially what it's telling them is you haven't logged into the learning management system enough. But what? Okay, so if I log in, suddenly miraculously learning's going to occur. Okay, it's just an indicator. What do they need to do in the learning management system? Okay, what types of activities? What are the instructional? And this is where the feedback needs to come through for the instructors around saying you need to make it informative. What is it precisely that you want the students? I would like you to log in. I would like you to make a forum post, a reading, answer these questions, do some formative assessment, and then make it a lot more clearer. And the staff who did this and through the research there of TENS certainly did see improvements, and it did improve student motivation and did improve student feedback. At UniSA, we went through a model there as well, like all universities in Australia. We have a retention notion there. We would like to, everyone wants to improve retention, except for University of Melbourne, apparently. They're rocketing along. No, I'm just making jokes. Queensland University of Technology, Sally Kift and Karen Nelson had been working on first year transitions and had a nice model set up. So our staff had gone along, had lots of chats like we do in Australia. This is a model we think would work for UniSA. Here's a few minor tweaks and off we go. And essentially the trigger there was if you fail or don't submit an assignment or your first assessment, that would prompt an intervention of some type, generally a phone call. So we adopted this, we gave it a lovely title, Enhancing Student Academic Potential. We had trained callers, we went through the assessment process, and we focused on large first year courses that we know had a high failure rate and a high retention rate. Sorry, a high attrition rate, did you get that right? And it didn't work. Yeah, it was a roaring failure. So what we found was that we saw a significant improvement in academic performance of students, the ones we contacted versus those we didn't, but there was absolutely no improvement in retention. Nothing significant at all that we could find. And if anyone knows anything about statistics, you just keep using a different model until you find something significant. That's how much time we invested in here and still nothing came out. So yeah, it doesn't matter. What we found then, we went back and had a bit of think about the psychology of the process and so on, and the timing is critical. It's 4 or 5 weeks in. You know, surely we can do something earlier. Let's build this up. So we went through a process, classification based on associations. I'm happy to talk about any of the modelling later if people want. Essentially, it just does an association mining, looks for relationships between different areas. Why do students leave? And then tracks that through where you can do an intervention. So we did 3 touch points. The first one was pre-course commencement. So before students actually arrived at the university, but they were enrolled in the course, we had a risk rating that we could identify. But what do you do? Hi, I'm Shane. I'm just calling you, Jill, to say that you're at risk. I haven't started university yet. That's okay. So there wasn't really anything you can do in that process. So it was nice to know, but what it did is flag the second one around course commencement. So similar to the signals model there, where, okay, if they're a long way from university, we knew that they would not come on campus as regularly as other students, which meant that they wouldn't actually come to orientation, which meant that they wouldn't actually form the appropriate level of social capital that they may need for support to get through their assignments and first level assessments, to make that transition. So think of Tinto as we go through that process there. So we had the first one, the course commencement, Learn Online Activities, our Moodle system, learning management system, where students would engage with. The next one was our first assessment point. So that was the last one. But on number 2 is when you can have a critical conversation with students saying, I actually do need you to log in. And it's as simple as that. And do some activities here. We've designed the course around these elements. It's important that you keep up with the readings. It's important that you review the video contents on there, and it's important that you actually try some of the formative assessment. The other part is we found the knock-on effect was that, as I'll show a diagram later, was that staff would actually start presenting it in class early on in the week as part of their design process of how the course is structured. They started to put up the dashboards that we developed, and it was a great introduction for students to start to talk about, oh, I didn't realise that 70% of my classmates had already logged into the course on day 1. And so it was kind of a little prompt, a social prompt as well. So what we found out of 11,000 odd students, that we had 2,000 that we'd identified as academic at risk through our CBA process. We tried to contact all 2,000, but we weren't always lucky. And so we had 1,500 that were contacted. What we saw between the contacted and non-contacted was a 5% increase in retention, which if you put it in dollars terms equates to, I know, something around $2 million that the university would gain back from those students being retained at the university. Now, here's the ugly part. But of course they answered the phone. These are the great questions that your senior management group always ask. Of course they answered the phone, therefore they're more likely, so you've got a bias sample to start with. So to counter that, we actually went back at the end of each session and rang students again, randomly. Just picked them out, whether they were contacted previously or not contacted, but from that whole academically at risk group, we just randomly went through and rang them. And what we found is that students we couldn't reach before picked up the phone. Students that we could, didn't. So it was actually quite a mixed aspect. In each of the processes we go through there, we have 3 or 4 campaigns that's attached to a particular course. The trigger with the greatest impact, course access. It's simple. It's scalable, it's easy to interpret, and the conversations have greater resonance. This is what we actually started to establish with our staff, and I'll talk about the complexity of when you roll something out. This seems very simple. 2 students have never logged in to Learn Online. You can click on it, you can get the student details, and off you go. No problem. Send them a message. Beautiful. We have 100% have engaged over, 2 have never had online, nearly 100% have. There are no assessments open, your grade distribution, and it goes on. We have a whole heap of nice little visual reports that staff can get, but each of those reports you can drill down further into a student level to see who's accessing, whether it's a forum discussion, whether it's how many times they've viewed a video, how many times they've tried an assessment, and so on. The complexity, however, starts to come in is, what do I do with it? So what if I've got a class of 1,000 and 100 students have never logged in? You want me to actually respond to 100 students and create emails? So we actually start to divide groups. Some staff loved it, and as I said, they would go through and present this and talk about what this data tells them and how they'd like to interact. Other staff saw it as a workload implication. Simon Buckingham-Shum talks about algorithmic accountability, and this is where I'd like to unpack and tease this a little bit more. It looks simple, but it's a little bit more complex. And Simon's really talking about, what do you do if you've got a student who is out on the left-hand side there who never logged in but does quite well? What's that saying? What does it say about our own pedagogy? What does it say about students who are doing exceedingly well but they're not picked up in the model? How do we unpack that black box of the model and make it available pretty much for everyone? Okay, so we can actually have a look at it. What is being counted and how? Because each of those has an assumption associated with it. A predictive model is a simple process to build. We can build it. Understanding, though, and implementing the model is far more complex. We did a study with Dragan Gasovic on our courses. One size does not fit all, and learning analytics was the title of the paper we ended up working on, but essentially we ended up with this. So most predictive models look at a university-wide because it's easy. Right? We get all this pool of data in and we look at it across. At best, you might go down to a program if you have sizable program elements, and you make an assumption then of what the average student is. You also make an assumption around what the teaching practices are, and they're not always correct. So this was just to highlight the diversity that happens. So female students in some courses are upwards of 90%. But if I did that across the whole university, it's about 52%. If you look at international students, they range from, I think, 40-odd% down to 2 or 3%. And again, you make an assumption there around English as second language, international students coming in. Whether they're early access, the living at home, part-time, all of it we make assumptions that don't necessarily mean it's correct. So if you think back when we're asking people and our academic staff to make the intervention, to actually communicate to students, what if assumptions don't fit? Then what does it mean for that academic staff member? So one way we're trying to tackle this now is actually, we'll go through and we'll do our modelling for staff based on their course and their previous history associated with that course to give them a set of what we think are viable indicators for students' pass, fail and retention. But we also give our staff opportunity to build their own set of metrics. Okay, that's all well and good, but if the student doesn't make a forum post, that's dear to me. And they have to do that by week 1 because I love community and I want them to actually engage in that space. And if they're not doing by week 1, that's all well and good. It doesn't matter if my model is telling me that's not important. All right? It's important to me as a teacher, as a softer skill that may help them later on. We might find that that community builds the social capital they need for year 2. We're not analysing year 2 on that boat. We also need it to be student-specific and teaching-specific. So there's no point telling students you haven't logged into the learning management system if I don't use the learning management system because the first 3 weeks are practical. There's no point doing that. The context is critical and the models are not necessarily transferable. And this will be an element that Ryan Baker will talk about a lot. It's great to get a notion of what works in other universities. It's great to see, but invariably it'll be low income, socioeconomic status, first in family, distance from university be all key drivers, and then you'll add in things like their prior academic ability, such as how long has it been since they've studied, would be another element that'll come in. But it's how you interpret and the makeup of your university that will start to count. Another thing that's not often spoken about is we need to break the predictive model. Okay, so you can't just establish one that says, wow, I found finances, and Georgia Tech is a great example here. Finance was a barrier for students for completion of college. So they removed that. So what do you do with the predictive model now? That's the goal. The goal is to remove the barriers for students in terms of their passing and their retention so they can actually have a successful academic career. So for predictive models, its intent is to tell you those indicators that actually will prevent that. Our goal, the action, is to now try and break it, which means we need to go back and evaluate our interventions. We need to go back and evaluate all our processes that we undertake. And you can't do it on a 5-yearly cycle. Right? It has to be very, very regular. It has to be built into our learning analytics process. Okay. If learning analytics is easy, and we whipped it up, there's a dashboard, and we'll have lots of lovely dashboards. Blackboard Analytics has a great set of analytics visualizations as well. If it's so easy, why do we have so few large-scale examples across the world? There's very, very few. I'd say Open UK is probably leading, but they're fully online. So this was one of our investigations of a national project, was to try and benchmark in Australia around, because that would make it national rather than international, so very clear then. Benchmark the status, policy and practices of learning analytics. So essentially wanted to largely unpack the challenges. What's actually preventing people to move forward, like for universities to actually pick this up and do it very quickly. I won't go through in full detail because A, it's boring, and B, you're probably half asleep after your morning tea, but I'll go through quickly. We had 2 studies. One was the interviews with institutional leaders. Tell us what you think learning analytics are about? Do you see it as important? How's it been built in? How are you actually rolling it out? Who's leading those projects and so on? The second part was to go and get a whole heap of international folks and national folks who are interested in this type of research and start to say, for learning analytics to have long-term impact and sustainability, what do we need to do? And so they identified a process there. We had two distinct clusters that we came out of the first part. One that we deemed as a solutions focused. I've got a problem, learning analytics is the answer. Done. The other one was, we're not sure we have a problem, and we're not sure what learning analytics does, but we're very interested in what it may be able to do. And so we called that more of a process-oriented or process-focused. The solutions-focused, address a pressing need, time-sensitive, we need it fast. The process-focused one was more networked and an integrated model around the university, minimal time pressures, and they were all largely about innovation. This is our innovation space, it's experimentation. We're interested in what this might be able to come out of it. So from all that in the second study as well, we built a systems model where we had the senior management group defining a strategic capability. What is it that you really want? Which was influenced by the governance, the context of the university, how they defined learning analytics, the type of technologies they had and so forth. Well, then that feeds into, we always have an interested group of people in learning and teaching and learning analytics and ICTs and so on. There's always a group around the university. How do they feed into that implementing process? So those early adopters, what can we get their hands on, get them moving and start to iron things out, and then start to feed into broadly the scholarship of this area? What's the research and learnings that we can take from it? How do we improve the tool and data quality choice? Because no matter what you do, there will be incorrect data. It's your ability to cope with that. And it doesn't matter what you do, someone's going to say it's not in a format that I would like. Okay. On the other side, which is absolutely critical, is the implementation capability. What are we doing on the other side to start to help staff understand what this does and start to build in the training mechanisms, the analytics mechanisms, the analytics capability, so that it can keep feeding into this cycle? And what we saw from the solutions model was very much, we have a problem, let's implement something, let's get a tool, we're done. Yeah. There is no, it's divorced from the daily routines of most academic staff. It's slotted into, very siloed. We have a dashboard, tick. Yes, but is it improving retention? We don't know yet, but we have a dashboard. And they look really nice. I like blue. The process one was, it tended to have all the elements of what was needed there. The issue though, is that implementing side, the implementation capability and the implementing, is there wasn't a view to scalability. There are lots of people doing little things, but we don't know how we're going to harness this yet. There's a really cool tool that such and such tried, and it seems to be working really well, and it may have improved math performance. We need to do more research there, but we're not sure whether that would fit engineering or any other field or discipline. So there's lots going on, and they tended to have elements of it there, but not all of it embedded well. Here's a learning analytics maturity scale that we're just throwing together. At the bottom, that's where we sit at the moment. And if you talk about analytics in higher education, that's where we've sat since about 2005 when Goldstein and Katz did a study around North America of 50, 60 odd universities. Everyone's interested and passionate then, that was about academic analytics, passionate about getting data and implementing and creating more business intelligence, but no one is doing it well. It's not feeding into the decision making which Mike flagged. We need evidence. We want it to be part of our decision-making process. Visual in 2012, I think, was the last one, and we've seen no progression. With the solutions-focused one, what were the discussions with the senior management group, there wasn't a clear articulation of how we're actually going to move from that. Yeah, we've got a dashboard, great, and magic will happen in that space and people will pick it up and we'll move ahead. The process one took a very linear view of it. Oh yeah, we'll get there. We're going to do this, then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. But in reality, when we work through analytics, it's going to be more of this, is that you're going to have to adapt. So there'll be a group there, invariably, will say, what about privacy and ethics of students? Forgot that one, all right? Let's go back and talk to our student body, which means do we need to revoke, do we need to pull back some of the visualizations or the interpretation or the analytics of the data we want because we felt it was a little intrusive until we get the students on board and understand what it is. We wanted a student-facing dashboard. Do we give them self-comparisons? I'd argue very strongly no. Shane's here, the rest of the world is up here. He's got a long way to go. He's got 2 weeks to get there. Ooh, it's like one of those movies, isn't it? Anyway, it's not exactly motivating when you do that for certain demographics and certain groups. There are a lot of challenges to be addressed, leadership being number one, making it more aware of what learning analytics is. Teams are seldom interdisciplinary. We tend to say, wow, this sounds like an IT job, and off it goes to IT. Wow, this sounds like it should be in Mike's portfolio, well done. And it gets siloed into those spaces. We have a balance between do we scale or understand? We've got to weigh that up, and that's an institutional decision. We have a huge capabilities deficit. If anyone has any children at the moment of the age of going through university, get them into data. I think the last report coming out of, I think New York State alone needed something like 200 or 300 data analysts, and there was something like 30 trained across the whole country that were available at a particular time. They're doing PhDs in that space, in learning analytics. There's an over-reliance on current research at the moment for validation. This seemed to work in North America in their particular context, so it should work for us. Even though that university was Harvard or MIT or Stanford or something like that, it'll work for UniSA. May not, might have slightly different students there in a different context. So we need to merge both models. There's values in having a solution-focused one because you get stuff done. We have a problem. It's very understandable. It's not a bad model. It gets stuff done. But then how do you start to build into the other mechanisms for that longer-term view of it? This is where I wanted to talk a little bit about complexity. So Ashby came up with this notion of the law of requisite variety. And basically, the number of problems that's presented by an environment needs to be matched by the number of solutions for that to be in balance. It's kind of simple, right? Boycett and McKelvey came up with the law of requisite complexity in terms of leadership models, and that it takes complexity to defeat complexity. You can't oversimplify things, because if you start to simplify things, you end up with, if you start to oversimplify things, you actually end up with organisational silos, you end up with boundaries, you end up with friction, you end up with different vocabularies, and the list goes on and on and on. The IT group doesn't understand that when they give me a system that's controlled, and I don't have who has administrator rights to their computer? Not everyone. And not everyone does. So, but then I need to install software. I understand perfectly from the IT side, it's a huge, scalable, controlled system. We need to do a patch. We know everyone's got the same one. As soon as you've got software administration rights, you can install your own stuff. Hang on. There's conflicts there. That could throw us out of kilter. It creates a level of complexity, but it doesn't necessarily match it. Education is a complex system. Our staff are resilient. They will form their own little adaptive and self-organising clusters. Right? They'll bandy in those corridors. Don't you worry about that. Change is always non-linear here. You think it's having a positive impact because we thought we were incentivising X, and you end up with Y. Where the hell did that come from? I have no idea, but this is the sorts of things that happen in our wonderful institutions. It's beautiful. So learning analytics is in the same boat here. It's complex, but we have this. We treat it as we would any other project, and in particular an IT project, where we break it down into its constituent parts. So you get data, we've got to do analysis, we've got to do technology, we've got to do dashboards, and at some point we've got to do some staff training. And often they're all independent of one another. It doesn't deal with the interrelationships that happen in here. Where did the data come from anyway? Like shouldn't that be fed into staff training so they have full knowledge of what it actually means? What does a click mean anyway? Do we have a learning management system in here? I never thought we have that one. You get all sorts of great questions. So we have this view at the moment when we implement things like this to simplify. And that leads to these fixed boundaries and organisational silos, as I hinted at. So if we bring in a new model there around learning analytics and the way that we need to roll this, and this is where I like the work of Marion Albeen, is that complexity leadership theory. It's nice. It's an enabling aspect. And the models are agile. You're responsive to what elements happen. And she has a great diagram where you've got these environmental pressures that happen all the time in a university. You've got a group of people who need to make decisions. We need to respond to that. Suddenly the government says there's no more deregulation. We're going back to a demand-driven system. Sorry, no, the opposite. We're removing our demand-driven system. Right? We're going to have caps on universities. Who do you go to? You have to make decisions. That changes everything that you wanted to go through. You've got to think of new ideas. So part of that you'll push off to an administrative element. If we have to do more QA or government reporting, we don't need a lot of that adaptive, cunning, creative ideas that go on. We've got to do more reporting because there's a government regulation. Right? So you have the administrative part because it's scale, it's solid, it's stable. On the other side, when you have the adaptive, that's where you want to get this complexity. That's where you want all these little complex adaptive systems working in amongst one another to create the new ideas. It's how they balance between those two elements, and you get the productive tensions. So it doesn't matter if you're doing great innovation in learning analytics if it will never scale. Right? I have a tool that was built in cold fusion, and suddenly someone in IT has just had a heart attack about what they need to do to be able to program and rebuild that in something else. It's not going to scale as it is. There's no point. The concept could be great, and let's carry the concept over. So you need these two elements to work in tandem with one another. As I mentioned, the solution-based process really sits in that administrative camp. Right? It can drive change, but you need to be mindful then that you need to respond to organisational change. So as the needs of the university start to adapt, you need to be able to adapt with it, and that's where you might need some of the process, that adaptive model coming into play here. And likewise, the counter-argument then is you can be as innovative as you like, and we've often heard the phrase, a thousand flowers blooming, yeah? In terms of innovations in universities. Well, which ones are you going to pick? Okay, there has to be at some point a form of an innovation framework, if you like, that says these are the ones that we see as being high priority. So this year we're going to give them more seed money. We're going to invest more in those spaces, and we're sorry about the remaining 998. We'll get to you later. Any successful adoption of learning analytics is dependent on the institution's ability to respond and modify. It can't be a hard implementation. It has to be a soft implementation, pretty much like a startup. We're ready to respond to our users' needs at any time. Okay. I'll just cap, as I mentioned, it was all in the opening gambit, but as I said, I can talk for 30 or 40 minutes up here on pretty much what was in the title. The predictive modelling process is an easy step. It really is for an organisation. If you've got data and you've got access to data, it doesn't take long. You find a willing PhD student who, that needs a few extra bucks, and it'll be done in a week. But leveraging the insights such models can bring at scale and across context, that's complex and that takes time. And that's why we have so very, very few large-scale implementations across the world at the moment. We need a new approach to how we're delivering analytics, how we're building it into the capacity of all staff. It can't be driven by one unit. It can't just be Mike's camp. It has to be across and distributed across the university. Data cannot be owned by one group. It's building my Marshall McLuhan. It can't be owned by one group. You've got to make it free and available. You'll get different ideas and insights. Yes, you have to protect the privacy of students. Yes, it has to be ethical. But if you're asking staff to improve their teaching practice in an evidence-based format, you have to give them something more than a set score at the student evaluation of teaching at the end of their course. All right? We can do a lot more than that now. Let's build the capability for all our staff to be able to do that. Learning Analytics and Knowledge Conference in Vancouver in 2017. This is where all your hopes and dreams and aspirations will come alive. Of course, it'll be raining and you'll probably need your umbrella, but it'll be a great venue for you. Thank you very much for your time, and thanks again, Mike, for inviting me.
So we've got about 10 minutes for questions. So questions to Shane. I think very provocative, but a very balanced approach. I love the concepts of leadership changing to enable this, and also to this distributed model, which I think we've got to get to in terms of that. So thoughts, questions?
I'll flag, I didn't go into a lot of depth in a lot of other learning analytics, so if you want to get into social network analysis, video analytics, or anything else that pops in your head, feel free to ask.
So Shane, probably looking at for University of South Australia, what's your next steps? You've done one study, you're refining that and going to the next stage with that, or what do you think are the winners to actually look at as a next phase for analytics?
Yeah, no, great question. So as I mentioned, I flagged in there the metrics builder. So when we rolled out the first iteration of that dashboard, I said, we had some staff saying, thank you, this is wonderful, this is great. It's what I always wanted, just to clearly be able to see what students hadn't logged in early so I can go and help them out. And they crafted very, very detailed responses to those sets of students. They spent a lot of time and effort doing it. It was great work. Then we had another group that said, thank you, you've just turned over a whopping big rock, which has created a huge workload implication for us now. So, so we thought, okay, sorry about that, but we've got one camp happy. How do we modify the next part? So the next part was really, how do we build this into a scalable model? Can we have personalised feedback where, as I mentioned, that metrics builder, right? So we actually allow staff to create their own messages early. I need you to log into the forum on day one and introduce yourself because this is the reason why. If student has not done X, then Y. And so we actually send that out through our CRM, our customer relationship management tool, which has all the student information and details, shoots them across an email. There are obviously different layers and levels of that. Student doesn't read email. Do we care? If by day 3 student hasn't read email or done a response to X1, then prompt by SMS message. If by day 5 they haven't done it, can we do something else? And that's when we send around the Jedi squad to really smack around. Students live in fear in Adelaide. People stalk on the streets. So we have a scalable way now of being able to do it. And it allows our staff to create, through that metrics builder, a number of really personal messages that are, one, that our modelling is telling them these are critical elements you might want to be mindful of. And number 2 is these are the parts that I think match my pedagogical approach, what I'm teaching about and what I want to do. So that's the next big model associated with that. The other one is video is more and more. And we know less and less around it. So we're trying to get more of an indication of the types of videos. This is where we have that, if you think around the implemented bit and the interested group, how do you keep bringing in different sections there? So people are interested in different ways. So video is the new textbook, okay? That's pretty much a given, especially if you take a MOOC, video quiz, video quiz, video quiz. So what are students learning from videos though? So what did you pick up from this versus a lounge chair discussion versus a concept video versus a hand drawing on a piece of paper versus an Echo 360 lecture versus... So we don't really know what types of knowledge are being produced in that space or how students are actually interacting. So we're building in more around, one, students being able to comment on their own videos. If you upload a video, they can flag the important bits. Do they know they're important? The second part is then trying to get a deeper understanding around, if we present this in year 1, this is the types of outcomes that style or genre of video will produce. The other one is the student-facing dashboard, which has taken more time. So students clearly want this to be able, but the things we're missing from students, right? So one, I'm adamant, I will not tell our students that you're here and the rest of your class is here. It just doesn't work for all demographics. It's not a good way to go. But the other way to start thinking about it is, well, you tell us your goals. So we want students to become more self-regulated learners. So we're building a system now that actually enables them to, one, establish what your learning goals are for this course. I really just joined this course because I saw there were 90% females in here and I'm a lonely guy and I'm thinking I can find a future wife in this area. We've all got common interests. We joined the same course. Or is it something more around I really wanted to join this course because I see a future in digital media or something like that? What grade do you want to get? So, if I come back and say you got a credit but you're aiming for a high distinction, you're still going to be depressed. I wanted a high distinction in this. Why didn't I get a high distinction? So the feedback is structured very differently. So if I know that Shane only wants to get a pass, because pass will get me through university, then what's the feedback that I provide there? Versus someone who does want a high distinction but is now travelling at a pace that's, could be at a pass level. So you would vary that very differently. And that'll also be tied into that metrics builder aspect as well and the types of modelling we'll do. But students will get information back then, not to say you wanted a high HD, but now you're looking like you're going to get a pass. But we'll talk more around the prompts. You missed your study schedule this week. You told us you were going to study Monday 9 to 11 and you didn't.
Other questions? Okay. Oh, just wait to get the microphone there, sorry. Otherwise I'll get in trouble. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the social network analysis work you've been doing?
Yeah, I love that. Thanks. I'll slip you that $20 later. I love social network analysis. Everything for me comes down to network, so it's great. So we started off doing social network analysis on discussion forum activity, and it was a way to visualise then student interactions, what's happening there. We often saw tables, Shane made 5 posts, 3 replies. What does that mean? When you present it as a sociogram, as a network visualisation, it actually made sense as well. Actually, he made 5 posts and 3 replies, but he's still off to the side. He's not a well-liked person. Okay? You can actually do something around it in terms of instructor, but what was missing then is the quality aspect. So there's a lot more work and a lot now around natural language processing, content analysis of those discussion activities and integrating them into social network analysis. So I have a PhD student, she's brilliant. She's absolutely brilliant. Sasha Paquette. She's been working in MOOCs, scalable, informal discussion activities where you get thousands and thousands of postings. Is there community that resides in there? And what she's found is that essentially there's always a core nub of people who will actually start to build community amongst all this noise. I'm quite fascinated now how students actually navigate through that noise. And so there's a lot there that in terms of having scalable options for large lectures and students communicating with one another, is there a way in which we could restructure discussion forums through a network view which allows students to connect in different ways? The other part on the analytics in terms of those networks, who do you recommend that you would actually work with? So in the social network analysis, we often see students who are poor performers located with other poor performers. Right? High performers tend to locate themselves with high performers, and Dragan Gasovic has done the same in monitoring students as they go through a master's program and the courses that they take. The high performers flock together, low performers stay together. So how do you break those groups up? How do you actually start to social engineer this space? So if you think, it's a bad analogy, so I'll take all criticism afterwards. But if you think about, if you go for a run, I've got Strava and George Siemens, who doesn't really like me that much, but we follow each other. And he'll give me kudos occasionally, most of it's criticism, but occasionally he gives me kudos for a run that I did which was at a particular speed. Well done, great. How do you put those groups together? So, because you could do exactly the same thing. Shane, you did really well in this week, you tried to capture, and this could be automated. From a content analysis, this was the question you asked on a discussion forum. We actually think this would be a great person that you should ask a question to. Or I get a response that comes back and says, hey, Shane, you should ask Bob here. He's answered that in the past or has just accomplished that task, and he'd be able to give you insight. So there's a lot of ways we can automate through those networks, but we're not making enough value of them. The other part is we actually have trialling sociometric badges and wearable computing and seeing the dynamics of groups as they happen. So what happens in creative groups? What we define as a creative outcome, and what's the process that happens through those network structures? And it takes things like turn taking. So it doesn't record what was said. It records who said it as they sort of face one another in a group. And the interesting thing is Pierre Dillenberg has done studies here as well, is that if you actually visualize that element in a network, right, students as they're working in groups in those networks, you show them how much they're dominating the conversation, actually pass it back so everyone actually becomes equal. It's a really interesting notion. So again, how do you build networks and structures and information around that space? Right.
No, great question. One more over here.
Shane, it's really great to hear someone else using the term requisite complexity. When I've used it before, people have looked at me like I'm mad. But in terms of silos and compartmentalisation of processes, etc., one of the things that it's happened to me recently is my manager's come up to me and said, in the student feedback, it says Brian doesn't know how to teach. And it's only one comment in the feedback, a lot of other positive comments. And one of my response to that was, well, I'd like to see the analytics about where is this student, what have they been doing during the semester. And I just wondered about your thoughts about the connection between feedback and analytics.
Yeah, I like networks and systems. Actually, Swinburne has an awesome social network analysis group. Are you part of that? Sorry. No? Yes? No, you should. Yeah, it's a great group. Yeah, they have really good stuff there. I like systems, right? And when we went through around like these dashboards, what's the pinpoints, right? When we want to talk about student evaluation of teaching, when does it happen? And it happens through what we call our PDM, Professional Development and Management process, right? So you grab your academic staff member and you say, Shane can't teach. Right? That's clearly he can't lecture either, but nevertheless we'll forge ahead, right? So that's a pressure point. Or the other flip side is that Shane can't teach, but by God, his research is off the charts, right? Keep going, don't worry about teaching, you'll be right. That's the fast track to promotion, you're doing really well, right? So that's the conversation we wanted to unravel, but then you get the two dynamics. You get one is that we're giving them a set of data that people are making interpretation of, which is not a full set of data, right? Shane can't teach, so what? Did the students perform better? I really don't care, right? I couldn't care less. The student evaluations, if there was a negative scale, put me in that process. If the students learn. If they don't like it, learning is confusing. Of course you don't like it because it's confusing. You're disrupting their framework, right? It's hard. So if it's hard and they're learning and you get rated low, is that still a good thing? So if you actually had other data there to say, well, here's the assessment profile of my course, here's the longer term retention of my course, here's the outcomes that my students have been able to demonstrate as alumni, here's other aspects and skills that I can carry through, or here's how they interact in the learning management system. It actually puts that power back to both camps, the head of school and the individual, to say, here's my narrative around that. Right? And that is an area, we call them academic activity reports. And that's an area that our group's working with at the moment, is to try and untangle, then for you to also bring in other data sets so that both the head of school and the individual staff member can have a more nuanced understanding of what the set scores mean. They're very crude. They're valuable, I wouldn't get rid of them, but they're very crude, and there's other aspects we can join in there.